everyone, I thought I would sit and do my wrap up for June. Seriously, what even day is it? Yeah, so I read 5 books this month. I've got 4 of them here. The other one I borrowed and have given back, so that's why I don't have that one. In fact, let's start with that one. So the first book that I read in June was Vanishing Act by Jodi Piccoult. And so this is one that my mother-in-law lent me because she likes Jodi Piccoult. She knows I quite like her, so if she's read one, she tends to pass them on. And the reason I like Jodi Piccoult is because she tends to combine something sort of medical with kind of a moral or ethical question, and then also with a legal case. And it makes for a very interesting story that makes you think about something. So that's why I quite like her. But this actually was my least favourite book that I've read by her so far. Let's start with the plot. So Vanishing Act is about a woman called Delia, and Delia is like a search and rescue woman. She's got a dog and she goes out looking for lost children, and yeah, which is a really cool side of the story. And she has a child of her own, and she's in this kind of really close friendship with 2 guys, and they've been friends since they were little. There's flashbacks. And one of the guys he's her boyfriend, he's her fiance, I think, but they've been in an on and off relationship going back years and years and years. And then the other guy is like their mutual best friend, and yeah, they go back to childhood. And so you've got that little kind of setup dynamic, and she has a single dad, her mum is dead, and right at the start of the book, her father is arrested. And it transpires that he's been arrested for her, what's the word? Abduction, for stealing her away. And obviously that then raises huge questions and is completely devastating to her. And you get all of the kind of the repercussions throughout their family. And then it leads them all to question their past. And you get the legal case with her father and all of this. And it also has kind of ethical questions surrounding what the father did and why he did it, and all of that. So it's an interesting premise. Now, the reason why this wasn't my favourite, first of all, the thing I liked the most about it was the search and rescue element. I love dogs. You've probably seen my dog Dolly on this channel at some point. So the idea of like canine search and rescue, very cool. But I felt like, although that part of the story does play some key parts in the plot, it's not featured very much because there are a lot of complexities to lots of different parts of the story, and so it just can't get that much airtime, as it were, because the book would be 1,000 pages long. It's already pretty hefty. So it just doesn't get much time, and I thought that was a shame, because when the book opens with that and I was like, oh cool, I like this, and then it just kind of vanished as a bit of a side note for a lot of the book. So I thought that was a shame. And on that note, there are sort of complexities that I felt didn't add anything. So for example, there's a character who Delia goes to stay with towards the end of the book, and she is a Native American, lives on a reserve, and there's a lot of detail about her, and she's a really kind of unusual character. She like modifies Barbies for a living, like makes costumes for them and stuff, and she's quite a cool character. But as an example, with so much already going on in the plot, it felt like I didn't really, although it was kind of cool, like it didn't add anything, and there were so many other things in the plot that I would have liked to have seen develop further, if that makes sense. So I felt like there was a lot of that I would have liked it simplified in some ways so that some things could be expanded on more. However, I also felt that the book was very slow to start. It took me a long time to get into it. It felt like loads of stuff happened in the last kind of 100 pages. I think it's 500 pages. I don't know what print it is, I can't remember, but it is long. And so again, I felt like it it didn't hold your interest. There were bits that were really long and convoluted. There were bits that had extra characters or extra elements that I didn't feel lent very much, or just elements of the story that just didn't seem necessary. That was how I felt. It was overcomplicated, I suppose, in some ways. So there was that. One key thing that I really, really, really struggled with was that Delia's fiance ends up representing the father in court. And I just couldn't get my head around it, because surely that's not allowed. Surely that's a conflict of interest. And it does get called into question, and he does justify himself. And he says, you know, I don't share any of the information from the trial with Delia, and I'm able to separate myself from my professionalism, and etc., etc. And he does defend himself. But maybe I'm wrong, but I just couldn't suspend disbelief that you would ever be allowed to do that. If you're related to a lawyer, how could that lawyer possibly be allowed to defend you? I mean, I suppose it's his fiance's dad, it's not actually his father-in-law, it's his future father-in-law. Does that make a difference? I just found that element so hard to believe, that when he was then representing her, I couldn't engage with it. I was like, he wouldn't be representing her. So yeah, I found that quite difficult. And Jodi Piccoult's book always have something at the end that you kind of don't see coming. That's one of the great things with her books, like, oh wow, you know, it's usually quite emotional. And in this book, when that happened, I'd seen it a mile off, and it didn't get me. I think that's one of the things. Jodi Piccoult's books can be so emotional, and they make you ask questions about, you know, society and people, and they can be so interesting, and this one just didn't get me at all. So yeah, I guess that's why I didn't like it. But you know, it's just my opinion. So if you like Jodi Piccoult, still give it a go, but it wasn't for me. The next book that I read this month was, I believe, this one, The Wild Silence by Raynor Winn. I've wanted to read this book for ages. It's the sequel to The Salt Path, which I read last year. It was one of the best books that I read last year. In fact, I'll link below my best books of 2020, and you can see the review in there if you'd like to. And so the Wild Silence has actually been out for a little while, but it was in hardback, and I wanted to get it in paperback because I have the paperback of The Salt Path and I wanted them to match. So yeah, my mum bought this for me as a pre-order for my birthday, because it came out a few days after my birthday. So was absolutely delighted, because I've wanted to read this for ages. So The Salt Path, to give a bit of context, is about Raynor Winn and her husband Moth, and they become homeless through a sequence of events, and Moth also has a terminal illness, and they decide to make the best of the situation by following a life ambition to walk the Salt Path, which is the coastal path around the southwest of England. It's 630 miles, and they wild camp, and the book really gives light to the rural homeless, who you don't see. They don't have the same visibility, I suppose. So it gives awareness to that situation, and it's such a beautiful book. It charts their journey and the challenges they face and the things that they learned. It's stunning. I've recommended it to so many people. So The Wild Silence then follows what happens afterwards. So it says, all journeys must end, and when the couple return to civilization, they find that four walls feel like a prison, cutting them off from the sea and sky that sustained them, that had saved Moth's life. So when the chance to rewild an old Cornish farm comes their way, they grasp it, hoping they'll not only reconnect with the natural world, but also find themselves once again on its healing path. And it's again so lovely. I prefer The Salt Path of the two, but I love both of them. It's interesting to read about the aftermath of such a life-changing thing, and actually it charts the publication of The Salt Path in this sort of section of her life, I guess, which is fascinating as well, and how that came about, and what a difference that made to their lives. And I think seeing her relationship with her husband and her relationship with the natural world, it's just beautiful. And It covers mental health and physical health and the environment, and it's lovely. It's really, really lovely. So yeah, very, very hard recommend if you love reading about walks in the countryside and just life. It's stunning. So really, really thoroughly enjoyed The Wild Silence. That will be up there. I think I gave it 5 stars. That will be one of my top reads of the year, as The Salt Path was of last year. So then the next book I read this month, I can't speak, was What Katy Did Next by Susan Coolidge. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you'll have seen that I've been reading this series with my daughter. So actually, she read What Katy Did with my mother-in-law, with her gran, and then that was during lockdown. During lockdown, she was being read to by her grandparents over Zoom. It was lovely. So now that we're kind of back to regular routine, I've taken over reading this series, and so I read What Katy Did at School, and then I've just finished What Katy Did Next. When I was a kid, I absolutely loved these books. These are my copies from when I was little. They are old, and I mean, I've had these for 30 years, I think. Are they inscribed? I've had these since 1992. Oh, so there you go. And yeah, I read these over and over and over again. And I remember loving this, probably because I like reading books about travel. So let's go through the plot. What Katy Did follows an adult Katy, and at the start of the book, she befriends a mother and daughter called Mrs. Ash and Amy. And Mrs. Ash is looking after her nephew or something like that. And the nephew falls ill, and I think it's a nephew. And so she asks Katy to get Amy out of the house as quickly as she can, because Amy hasn't had this illness and they don't want her to get ill. And so Katy looks after Amy and just, you know, makes sure that she can write little messages to her mum, and is really lovely, as you would expect Katy to be. And then, because she's been so loving and tender towards little Amy, Mrs. Ash wants to thank her, and so Mrs. Ash asks to take Katy on a tour of Europe. And so this is incredible. These books are written in the 1800s. I think this must be like 1870 or something. Does it say? I don't think it does, but you know, it must be. And so, you know, going to Europe for an American would just be, you know. So the book covers them crossing the ocean and then travelling around the UK and France and Italy, I believe. And I remember reading it as a child. I just thought it was such an adventure, and I loved reading about all the different countries. I remember adoring this book. But reading this to my daughter, it was a real drudge because firstly, the language in this seemed more complex than the others, more kind of dated. But also there is so much like architecture and classic references. It'll have a whole paragraph about, you know, some classic, like relating it to an old a myth or a story, like something my daughter won't know about, or, you know, a story that my children won't have read because it's hundreds of years old. Yeah, just like real kind of complicated high culture stuff, or yeah, I don't know, just a lot of references and long passages about those kind of things that just were so hard to get through because my daughter had no idea what I was talking about. And she did enjoy it. She liked the story, but I had to keep stopping and explaining what was happening. Yeah, she seemed to really struggle with this one. Whereas What Katy Did at School, she got it and she enjoyed it, but this one just seemed really tricky for her. So, I'm very fond of this book. It has a lot of memories for me, but yeah, I think, not so good revisiting it now with my child. I think if I'd have just read it as an adult, I still would have really enjoyed it, but trying to share it with my child, it seems odd that I don't remember there being long sections that I had no idea what they were talking about. Because like reading it to my daughter, she does not care about the architecture of a cathedral, or maybe I skipped those bits, I don't know. But yeah, it just was quite hard going, and there's a lot of nuance in certain parts of it that she just didn't get, and I had to explain to her. But anyway, she seemed to quite enjoy it, but my least favourite of the three, I would say. But there we are. So we've read that series, she enjoyed it, and now we've moved on to, she's onto the Twisted Tales with from Disney, because she likes kind of looking at the baddies and things at the moment. So that's her thing. The next book I read was Mixed Up: Combination Feeding by Choice or Necessity by Lucy Ruddle, IBCLC, and this was sent to me by the publisher for a review, and I was delighted because I follow Lucy Ruddle on Instagram and on Facebook as well, I think, and the information she puts out is absolutely amazing. And so when I saw she was releasing this book, I was thrilled. This book is published by Piccoult Press, who are a self-publishing service for sort of early years health type books, I believe, if I remember rightly. So I was interested in that too. And so this book, it covers such an important topic because there is so little information really out there about combination feeding. Lots of parents find themselves in the situation where either they would like to give some formula or they have to give some formula because they've been medically advised to do so. And I think that there's not a lot of information out there, and also that it can be very hard to access support around that because it's such a emotive topic in terms of the sort of breast formula thing. And I mean, anybody who supports in the breastfeeding world is going to support a parent with what they are asking for support with. And if a parent comes and says, hey, I want to give a bottle of formula X amount of times a day, then that's what they will support that parent with. But nonetheless, there still is such little information out there because it's almost like it's something that's people are sort of scared of talking about. One thing I loved that this book tackled was that in a lot of cases, actually supporting combination feeding, long-term combination feeding, helped breastfeeding to continue. Because if somebody wanted to formula feed, you know, one bottle a day because there was a particular time of day where it was difficult for them to breastfeed and they needed that time and so on, supporting that and helping to balance that situation allowed breastfeeding outside of that bottle, whatever the particular balance is, help that to continue rather than potentially resulting in that person feeling that they had to make an either-or decision and that they may well go entirely onto formula, and that you may almost, it's almost counterintuitive that supporting formula actually can help to support breastfeeding more. Does that make sense? I don't know, but I thought that was a really interesting point that combi feeding does actually, in many cases, extend breastfeeding. I thought that was fascinating. But it goes through so much nuance, you know, on what if you have been giving formula regularly but you would like to move to exclusive breastfeeding, or what if you have been exclusively breastfeeding but you've started to think you would like to introduce some formula. And the fact that you don't have to do that either or choice. And it covers, you know, how to prepare formula, how to balance how much you give, how to help your body to react to the change in milk demand, and just all of that stuff. So it's such a helpful book. I think it's so useful. There's just anybody who is in this situation, whether you are combi feeding because it's what you want to do or because it's what you have to do, this is just fabulous. Literally the only criticism I could give it is that there's one reference somewhere in it to, I'm going to put the sections about this in pink or something like that, and there's no colours. And then there's something in there, I remember, so it says that if there are sections which, if you're feeling a bit vulnerable and don't really want to read stuff that, you know, just if you're not in a great place about the whole formula breast situation, skip these sections because it might be a bit emotional for you right now. And they, I think it says that they'll be in grey. I can't remember the exact wording, but then, and they do have, I'm trying to find one now, they have like a little exclamation, there you go. They have a little exclamation mark in them. But then there's also sections that have the speech bubble in, and I do wonder from the way it's described whether these were meant to be a different colour instead of both grey, because it would make it clear, and just the way it's explained, it feels like that was the way it was supposed to be. I could be wrong. So yeah, that was it. Was just, it would have been good if some bits were a different colour. So that's the only criticism I have. It's excellent. The information in it is fantastic. So yeah, great little book. Well, it's not that little, but would very much recommend for people in that situation or people supporting them. Fabulous. And then the last book I read this month was Let's Talk About Feeding Your Baby by Professor Amy Brown. I, again, was sent this by the publisher for a review. And this is basically everything you need to know, from breastfeeding to combi feeding to formula feeding and to solids. So just, if you're going to feed your baby something, this tells you about it. Basically, it covers the whole first year. And so, as you'd expect from Professor Amy Brown, she's published a number of books about breastfeeding, and this is very, very heavy on the breastfeeding content. It's about half full of breastfeeding information. It's very, very good, very well written. And then it then goes through formula for quite a short section, but you know, thorough, says everything it needs to say. And the combi feeding section is in the breastfeeding section, so I suppose that could have been split up. And then it goes through solids. I really like the solids section in this, and I really wish that I'd have had that solids information when I introduced my first child to solids, because there's so much stuff out there on like, oh, don't give apples until they're 8 months old, but then don't give apples until they're 10 months old. Or what, you know, there's like contradictory stuff, and you must give meat at this age, and you must give, I don't know, berries at this age, and just, you know, when should you give peanuts? Who knows, because it seems to change all the time. Like, as in peanut butter, you wouldn't want to give actual peanuts to a baby because it's a choking hazard. And this just makes it all so clear. This is what the evidence says, this is what the guidance is, and that's it. And it just clarified everything, which I remember when I weaned my eldest, and I just didn't know. Didn't know what foods to introduce and when to introduce them, and just was thoroughly confused by the whole thing. So yeah, the solids bit is, I mean, the whole thing is excellent, but that bit I really, really particularly enjoyed. So it also includes little sections in yellow which are contributions from other authors. So there's people like Natalie Schenker from the Milk Banks, there's Kat Stagg, IBCLC, who is from Breastfeeding Twins and Triplets. There's, who else is there? Let's give you another example. Kim Roberts, Chief Executive of Henry, which is a health, exercise, nutrition for the really young. So yeah, there's little contributions in it as well, which is really nice. Gives you little snippets of extra information. I thought this book was really, really good too. And the only thing really, and in fact this was the case in this book too, is that I would have liked more inclusive language. This is something that is coming into breastfeeding support more now, as there's a lot more awareness. And I don't know when these books were written. Obviously they're written at a different time to when they're published, so I don't know. This is something that has been discussed more and more over the last few months. Yeah, I don't know. And so yeah, I would have liked more references to sort of parent rather than woman and that kind of thing, and the inclusion of the term chest feeding. And particularly, it was more noticeable in this book, and the reason for that is because in a book that was also covering formula and solids, it's a book that can appeal to the non-breastfeeding parent. And I would have wanted my husband to read this book. So it's not only about being inclusive in terms of the breastfeeding parent, but also being inclusive in terms of partners, and partners feeling that the book is directed to them. And because as I say, this includes stuff on solids, it includes stuff on giving bottles and all that my husband or partners can get involved in. I just felt that not only would inclusive language have made it more inclusive for more diverse families, you know, in terms of the breastfeeding parent, but also in terms of the supporting parent as well. And so, yeah, that was the only thing really, is I just would have liked to have seen inclusive language used in those two. So that's it. That's everything that I read this month. I'm currently reading a book which I am not getting on with at all and will probably be a 1-star read and has sent me into a total reading slump. And I know I could DNF it, but, you know, I'm going to get through it, aren't I? I hate DNFing books. So anyway, that was everything that I read in June. Let me know if you have read any of these books and what you thought of them. Yeah, leave me a comment and let me know. And please do hit like if you enjoyed, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Take care.